Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the X's and O's with Greg Cosell. That over there is my good friend Greg Cosell of NFL Films and ESPN's NFL Matchup, the author of The Games That Change a Game right there, next to some idiot book called Doug Farrar wrote that. Anyway, I'm Doug Farrar of Touchdown Wire and the USA Today SMG Sports Media Group. And Greg, last week we did the best offensive scheme fits from the 2024 NFL Draft. We're going to switch to defense. And these are best scheme fits like positions of need, but really, how do these guys fit into what their coaches want? Why did they go after these guys in particular? And kind of how that all matches up.
And I think it's important, Doug, just before we start, to let people know that these are not the only ones. We can't talk about 30 guys, obviously. We don't have that kind of time. So I don't want people to, someone to say, oh, well, why didn't you mention this guy? We're picking a few guys that we feel good about, and it doesn't mean they're the only ones.
We did not mention the guy you want because we specifically hate your favorite NFL team. That's
right.
That's all we do this for. Well, a lot of these are more than one guy on the same team, and we'll start. And that's where it became like I'm going through these and thinking, okay, what are the best? How does the team get better and better with these specific guys? So in a lot of cases, it's more than one guy, and usually it's in the secondary. That is certainly the case of the Arizona Cardinals, who took two corners, Elijah Jones and Max Melton, and then the safety, DeJean Taylor Demerson. Last season, Greg, the Cardinals ranked dead last in defensive DVOA. Only the Commanders had a worse passing defense DVOA. Jonathan Gannon didn't have a lot to work with in the secondary. Safety Jalen Thompson was the only Arizona defensive back last year who allowed an opponent passer rating of less than 80, and only Thompson had more than one interception with his 4. So GM Monty Austinfort, assistant GM Dave Sears, and Gannon had a lot they needed to accomplish in the draft. They did all they could with these three guys. Both Melton and Jones are true outside stopper cornerbacks, at least in potential, and Taylor Demerson has the range to play the deep third, which the Cardinals have confirmed that's where he'll start, leaving Thompson to do his thing closer to the line of scrimmage, and Budda Baker is the wild card. Before we get into this, what are your thoughts on where Budda Baker fits best? Because now they've got all these new guys. They want them to play right away. Based on what you've seen from Budda Baker over the last couple of years, where does he fit in a defense?
Well, instead of talking about it that way, I think it makes more sense to talk conceptually about what we saw from Jonathan Gannon last year, because about mid-season, they kind of made a change in how they played on the back end. They started almost to play with either 5 across at quarters depth, or certainly 3 across at quarters depth, with the 2 corners a little closer to the receivers, maybe within 4 or 5 yards. But they sort of played.
It's a bunch of big nickel up top, basically.
Yeah, well, they took their nickel corner, who for the most part, and he got hurt a bit, but for the most part, it was the Syracuse kid, Garrett Williams, who was playing nickel corner. I think he's the one they wanted to play nickel corner last year. And they dropped him back, and he was playing at quarters depth with the other 2 safeties, and Budda Baker was essentially playing in the middle. And so You had Garrett Williams on one side, Baker in the middle, and Jalen Thompson on the other side, and they were all 3 at quarters depths, so they did not really have a true slot corner lined up over a slot.
Okay.
So it was an interesting way to play, and then they would add in, more often than not, Budda Baker to the run game, and he would sort of add in, how he saw it. More often than not, he'd be a strong side player, but he'd add in as he saw it, because he's an instinctive kind of player.
I remember him coming down from a few of those overhangs, coming down.
Yes. Right. So the question is, are they still looking to play a similar way? It was kind of a different way to play. And again, it's all part of the whole sort of quarter structure that more teams are playing. A lot of people believe that the quarter structure, sort of coming from the Vic Fangio mold, is one reason why scoring is down. Big plays are down a little bit. There's probably a multitude of reasons, but that's one reason people point to. So the question is, Doug, they drafted all these DBs. They're not all going to play at the same time. No. So the question is, how does it shake out?
Dollar defense on every down. No.
Yeah, that's a question we can't really answer at that point. I mean, I don't know what they think of Garrett Williams. He was their slot. Elijah Jones from BC is really kind of a slot. Melton can play on the outside. As you said, Taylor Demerson is, he can probably play post safety, but where does Buda Baker fit into all this? So
Right.
that's something they're going to have to figure out. I don't know the answer to this, but clearly they felt that they needed to address the secondary for whatever reason.
Monty Ossenforth, the GM, was more definitive about Taylor Demerson than he was about the corners. He said, absolutely, he's played safety down there for them, speaking of Texas Tech. Best attributes, I'd say, are his range and his ball skills. He has a nose for the football. I think he's going to be able to play the deep half of the field, and then we'll see what else he can do. Versatility will come after that, but if we think he brings a versatile element and range to the back half of the defense. And when we get into the Eagles and Vic Fangio and what Fangio said about Cooper DeJean, he said exactly the same thing. Like, we're going to start him in one place, and then as he gets that, we'll kind of expand it.
And that's the way it normally works, because a rookie has to learn a position.
Right. So Taylor Demerson, I mean, I was like all about
and I liked him as well. And he played multiple positions, in college for Tech. I mean, he played post safety, he played split safety, he played in the slot, he matched up man to man at times. You wouldn't call him a sudden twitchy great athlete, but he is a good athlete, and he certainly, I thought, had enough. His hips were loose enough. I thought he could play on the back end. So it sounds like that's where they're going to start him. We'll see what their defense looks like, but I'm very anxious to see that, because now that they have Kyler Murray back, they drafted Trey Benson, they drafted Marvin Harrison. You'd like to believe, as we sit here in mid-May, that they'll be an improved team in a difficult division. That's a difficult division.
Yeah. Melton allowed 24 catches on 44 targets for 252 yards, 72 yards after the catch, 3 touchdowns, 3 picks, 3 pass breakups, opponent pass rating of 65.7. A couple things that stood out to me, and we've talked about him before, very matchy feet and very match speed and a good route jumper. He's just kind of always around the ball.
He's one of those feisty, competitive press man corners.
Yep.
Probably not quite as big as you'd like, but he certainly can play on the outside. And we'll see. Again, he's a rookie corner, so it's easy to sit here, as everybody does. Oh, now they're all set. You heard that. We'll get to the Eagles. You heard that with the Eagles. Well, now they turned a weakness into a strength. Well, these guys are rookies. You don't know that yet. But
Super Bowl, here we come.
Right. But Melton certainly can play on the outside, and given that they've had so many injuries at corner and have had to really get street free agents, I think Melton will get a chance to start on the outside.
Elijah Jones, you said he's more of a slot. What makes you?
I didn't see much of him, so you know him better.
Okay, because I thought, they played Boston College played a lot of single high. I thought, and when I say island cornerback, I don't mean Deion Sanders. I mean that he can take the third of his field and deal with it in a way that allows you to, especially if he's playing the ISO and it's bunch or trips on the other side, you can shade your safeties to that side because your cornerback's got it. I thought he was really good at that. It stood out to me. I wrote a thing for Athlon's Draft Preview magazine where I mentioned him as one of the better island corners. So I think while he could play the slot, I think he's perfectly fine playing outside, and I think he can, not that he's going to clamp down your X-ISO, because if he was that, he would have gone in the first. He would have been a top 15 pick.
Yeah, and he does have really good size. I was wrong. I made a mistake. I was thinking of someone else.
All good.
I was thinking of someone else because he is big. He's.
Hey, we've all got 4,000 names in our heads right now.
Yeah. No, he's over 6'1", so yeah, no, he can play on the outside. He ran well. He was one guy I just saw a little of. I didn't get to him as much as I wanted to. And he actually tested really, really well. So
he did.
Yeah, I was just thinking of someone else. But no, he can certainly play on the outside. I think both those guys Melton and Jones are going to get an opportunity to start on the outside.
I think right away. Well, Jones will have 13 catches on 40 targets for 194 yards, 58 yards after the catch, 1 touchdown, 5 picks, 6 pass breakups, and an opponent pass rating of 18.1, which means if the quarterback dumped the ball into section U, he'd have a better chance of getting it completed. I just, I kept watching him, and I know he went later in the draft, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm not going to proclaim him as a sleeper. I don't know what that means. But obviously the league felt a little differently about him than I did, and certainly with Taylor Demerson, who I thought. And with Taylor Demerson, I get it because what I wrote about him was that his athleticism is a bit ahead of his acumen, but at a certain point with the right coaching, his acumen is going to kick in and watch out because.
I was surprised where Jones went, given his size, his length, his testing measurables. Normally, corners like that go higher.
Well, corners who can legitimately play outside, and as I said, handle the deep third and handle his third of the field to the point where you can shade the safeties to the other side. And BC played a lot of cover one, but when they played two in any sort of way, they did that a lot. They said, okay, he's got that, we can do this. And
Right.
anytime you have a cornerback like that, that's just valuable.
So yeah, so they're going to revamp. I mean, their secondary is revamped, and they obviously wanted to revamp it based on what they did in the draft.
Yep. Okay, next team is the Lions secondary with Terrion Arnold, and Ennis Rakestraw Jr. I want to start with Arnold because the play we'll put up here is the crosser he had.
Yeah.
Lad McConkey, where he just erased McConkey. It's like, Lad McConkey's really good at getting open, except when this guy's defending him. Before I get into Arnold, I just want to get your sense of what you thought of him. And I wanted to bring, and when we get into the most improved position groups over the next couple of weeks, we'll get more into this. But you had an event with Buck Rising of Tennessee Radio, and you had the Titans GM Rand Carthon on. And we're going to talk a lot about press coverage in this particular podcast. And I don't know if it was Buck or you who asked Rand Carthon why L'Jarius Sneed was a fourth-round pick way back when, and now he's so valuable. And I'm compressing the quote, but Rand Carthon said, because press coverage is so much more valuable than when Sneed came into the league and everyone was trying to do Seattle's cover 3 stuff.
Yeah, and that's a great point because
fascinating quote.
Yeah, because and I kind of knew the answer to the question. I was the one who asked it because I wanted Rand, because obviously he's the GM and I'm not. I wanted Rand to be the one who explained it to the audience. That we had a great audience in Nashville, by the way. I think, and I've had this conversation with some defensive coordinators, over the last, and it's probably only been in the last 3-4 years that it's really taken shape, because there's been such an increase in quick game throws, okay? Whether it's RPOs, which are quick game throws, or whether it's just quick game in general, 3-step drop, quick 5-step drop. And obviously we're talking about normal down and distance situations when the offense can be more proactive. Obviously when it's 3rd and 9 or 3rd and long, those kinds of situations, things are different. But when you're talking about 1st and 10, 2nd and 4, the nature of the NFL pass game for the most part has become much quicker. So as you extrapolate from that point, Doug, what does that mean? It means that you're not going to get to the quarterback as much as you used to when there were deeper drops, and we focus so much on pass rush by defensive ends, by edge rushers. Not that those players aren't important anymore, but it's different. So now, how do you disrupt?
Also, just to break in, it's also why interior defensive pressure is so much more important, because the shortest distance is a straight line.
Right. So, but the overall question is, how do you disrupt a passing game when the ball comes out so quick? Because you're not going to get to the quarterback. So now, how do you disrupt it? You've got to disrupt receivers. Yep. So press becomes so much more important. Now, just as an aside, and as we talk throughout this summer and talk more concepts, but just as a quick aside, that's also one reason why motion has become a bigger part of offense.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's a way to counter press at times. So we'll get to that another time.
Yeah,
but the
you
bottom
can't
line,
press the guy when he's moving. It's
right.
Really hard.
Right. But the bottom line point is you have to disrupt receivers now more so than ever before. So therefore, corners and the ability to play press with some effectiveness has become more important than ever. So someone like L'Jarius Sneed, who is a master of press and is physical, really physical and competitive, that's what you kind of want with your corners now. You want them to be able to play that way because you're going to have to play that way at times.
Yep.
So, and Rand kind of spoke about that, Rand Carthon, that is. But getting back to the Lions, that's one reason why they drafted Terrion Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw.
Well, let's start with Arnold. Let's start with what Aaron Glenn would like to play on defense. And this is a guy who, he was a Pro Bowl cornerback. He had been running the passing games for the Browns and Saints before he got this job as a DC. When your cornerbacks allow 77 catches on 140 targets for 1,250 yards, 12 touchdowns, 1 interception, and an opponent pass rating of 110.7 in man coverage, you can't play what you want. And I think they want to be more aggressive. So let's start with your opinion of Terrion Arnold, who, I love him. There's not a lot to not like. How he fits into what you think Aaron Glenn wants to do.
Well, I think, as you suggested, I think Aaron Glenn ultimately would like to play more press. He did it a couple of years ago,
Mhm.
and he didn't have the people, and they got
Right.
burned. And then he realized, wait a second, I can't keep playing this
Didn't
way.
they flip it like halfway through the season? Like, screw it, we just got to do it this way.
Yeah, well, because they just didn't have the people, and they were giving up. Remember that stretch where I think they were giving up the most passing yards and points, and you just have to realize, hey, I don't have the people to play this way, so
Right.
we're going to have to make an adjustment. But I think deep down he'd prefer to play more man. Now that doesn't, again, for people listening, that doesn't mean you play man on every single snap. But I think as his staple foundation, he would much prefer to play man. I thought Arnold was a master at what I call mirror match press man. Not that he
Yes.
couldn't be physical. He certainly had targeted physicality, and he was good at that as well. But I thought in terms of mirror match, and so people know what that means that you're essentially waiting for the receiver to declare his release, and
Mhm.
then you get right in his hip pocket. You don't necessarily physically jam him and push him. You let him declare, and then you just get in his hip pocket. Maybe the best that I can recall ever seeing it, that was Champ Bailey. He was
Mhm.
a master in mirror match press man.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but Arnold is, I thought, was really, really good based on his Alabama tape. Rakestraw is a smaller corner, but
Mhm.
I thought he was really feisty and competitive, and I thought he was at his best playing press man.
Mhm. Talk to me a bit more about Rakestraw. This was a situation where, and you have to put this stuff out of your head, and you have to watch more, and you have to understand that one bad game doesn't, you have to put it in a little slot over here. The first game I watched was the Florida game where Ricky Pearsall kind of lit him up, and Pearsall's a good receiver, but just your overall, like, where, and Rakestraw had some pretty decent slot. I'm less sure about where he fits in that defense because Arnold, he's a day one. I mean, and the way he gets low in his stance and is able to move like that, I'm not comparing to Lester Hayes. Remember how low Lester Hayes used to get? Like he was
Yeah.
almost on the ground. I think with Arnold, it's an easy fit. Brad Holmes just talked about it, until he was, blue in the face, how happy he was. I'm not saying Rakestraw is a bad player. I'm just a little less sure of where he fits.
Well, he's not going to play the slot. Well, let's put it this way. Could he? I mean, it depends what they want to do with Brian Branch, who's a
Well, yeah,
really good football
I
player.
wouldn't move Brian Branch from the slot for anything.
No, I wouldn't either. I wouldn't either. But again, they'll figure out their best 11. But I do think Rakestraw can play on the outside. I know a lot of people probably saw him as a slot simply because of his size. And maybe that's where he has to play. That's always hard to know how a team sees him. But the one thing that I really liked about Rakestraw was how feisty he was. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he was another guy that played a ton of press. He would
Yep.
play physical with press too. We'll see. I mean, obviously they drafted him not to sit on the bench.
No.
Arnold will be a day one starter, barring anything
Oh yeah.
unforeseen. Rakestraw, probably not, but who knows? But I agree. I mean, Brian Branch is a terrific football player. Now, when they went base last year, where they only had two corners on the field, they ended up moving Branch and having him play safety. And then when they went nickel, he moved to the slot. I would really doubt they would change that.
Yeah.
I mean, Branch is a really good slot
There was
player.
that little stretch where Branch got hurt and their defense started to hit a little valley there. You could
Yeah.
tell, like right away in his rookie season, he was making a difference. Yeah. Again, I don't want to say Rakestraw's a bad player. I'm just with Arnold. It's like, yep, okay, I get it.
Well, they drafted Arnold to be a day one starter.
Yeah, and with Rakestraw, it's just the ease in transition. He would not. We talked about with Arnold the hip pocket thing. I think Rakestraw kind of struggled with that at times, which is why I wouldn't want him in the slot either. But I just that's just me. I don't know. But certainly with Terrion Arnold, they got a guy. They got a dog. Eagles secondary with Quinyon Mitchell, who was just above Terrion Arnold as my favorite corner in this class. I think he was my number one defensive player, and Cooper DeJean. You are very familiar with the Eagles, so the play we're gonna put up for Quinyon Mitchell is the press transition to the post versus Maryland, where he broke it up. Just because he came from Toledo, and then the Senior Bowl, it's like, okay, he can handle whatever. You can see that on the tape. They already have Darius Slay. James Bradbury kind of unfortunately fell off a cliff last year. Is Mitchell a day one starter? And whether he is or not, what attributes do you see him in that Vic Fangio defense? Because they got a new, obviously a great defensive coordinator. How does that all work for you?
Well, Mitchell obviously at Toledo did not play a lot of press. He was an off
No,
coverage
he was
corner at
off all
Toledo.
the time.
Yeah. Now at the Senior Bowl, he did play press, and people felt he did it really well, and I'm sure the Eagles did too. I think in an ideal world, I'm just going based purely on tape. It would be difficult to put out James Bradbury as your outside corner opposite Slay this year, and unless Bradbury were to improve significantly from what he did a year ago.
Maybe he was hurt and we didn't know, but it was not good.
Now he's an older player, so who knows? We're not there every day, so we don't know. But I would think that they drafted Mitchell with the idea that he'll start opposite Slay. Mitchell, to me, I think the reason that they would prefer Mitchell over Arnold, because I think they had the opportunity to draft either one. Isn't that correct?
So. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the Lions were later in the
order. Just the measurables. He's bigger. Right. He's a more physical looking guy. His measurables were off the charts, more so than Arnold. And I think they feel that they can really turn him into a big time NFL corner. He was phenomenal at the catch point. He made great. Now, he didn't make a lot of interceptions, so that's one thing some people do look at. I think he only made 5 in his career, and 4 came in one game.
He had 14 pass breakups last year, though. So
right, but he was really good at the catch point. Yeah. He just had a feel for getting his hand in there right when the ball got there. Yep. He just seemed to have a feel for that. Now, that's coached and taught as well, by the way, but not everybody does it.
Right.
But he'll play on the outside. Cooper DeJean, I think they drafted him, I believe, to play the slot. And I think that's where they see him. They see him as a slot player. Again, I'm not making an apples-to-apples comparison, but I think that Vic Fangio probably sees him kind of like Jalen Ramsey, that star position where the player is really instinctive, sees a lot, can make plays, because DeJean is that kind of guy. I didn't think he was a pure outside corner. And I know a lot of coaches I spoke to felt the same way. But I think, in the slot, because, like I said, he does have a feel. I think they see him as a player that can be impactful playing in the slot.
Well, and the slot to safety and what Fangio does, it's a really important transition. The other thing, I wonder if, because when Vic was in Denver, when he was their head coach, and quarters off, when he had Patrick Surtain, they played a lot more man than anybody expected from Fangio.
Oh, no. Vic played more man. Even in Miami, he played more man than people thought.
But he's also he will adhere to his personnel as opposed to saying, this is the way I do it, and, that's it, blah, blah, blah.
No question.
No question. Not who he is. Yeah, what Vic said about DeJean in general, we have a system that's versatile, we like to think. It needs to be versatile because every week you're facing different strengths of an offense, different schemes. So what you play in one week 10, 15 times, you may not play it all the next week. You have to have a versatile system for the offense today in the NFL. What we'll eventually do is learn what our guys are best at. And he said the same thing with DeJean that, other teams talk about. We'll start him in one spot. It's probably the slot.
Yeah.
Maybe overhang. We don't know. But Vic has used overhang guys before, certainly. We'll start him there, get him totally comfortable there, then start to expand.
Yeah, and again, keep in mind, depending on how they want to play, they could play big nickel too, at times with 3 safeties. I mean, there's multiple ways to play here, and DeJean, I think, is that kind of player. So, they certainly feel that they've upgraded their secondary, which needed to be upgraded, and they also re-signed Gardner Johnson. Obviously, they brought him back, so he'll play one of the safety spots. So they really have 2 guys in Gardner Johnson and DeJean who sort of have a feel for the ball, for seeing things develop. So
Gardner Johnson's another guy who can play everywhere. I mean,
it should be an improved secondary for sure.
Who is there? Oh God, I'm drawing a blank on their other safety.
Reed Blankenship.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, good stuff there. And when it's Vic, you're always interested to see what's going to happen because he's always ahead of the game. Cowboys defensive line with Marshawn Kneeland. Greg, last season under defensive coordinator Dan Quinn, the Cowboys ran some kind of stunt or game on their defensive line on 292 of their 1159 defensive snaps. That 25.2% rate was one of the league's highest. Well, it's unlikely that new defensive coordinator Mike Zimmer, who also ran Dallas's defense from 2000 to 2006, will be that volatile with his fronts. The 2021 Vikings did run 158 stunts in Zimmer's last season as head coach there. In an NFL where gap versatility is the order of the day, every defense should aspire to have as multi-position jokers as possible. Cowboys already have one of the best in Micah Parsons, who can beat opposing blockers everywhere from head over nose to wide 9 end, and can also beat offenses off ball. Now with Marshawn Kneeland from Western Michigan with the 56th overall pick in the second round, they have 2. Last season for the Broncos, Kneeland totaled 6 sacks, 37 total pressures, 38 solo tackles, and 35 stops. He did it all over the line, again, from head over nose to spinner to, So and Will McClay, their director of player personnel, was one of the VP of player personnel, one of the most highly respected personnel guys in the NFL. You may not know his name, but everyone thinks the world of Will McClay. He talked about the physical talent, the versatility, and as you said last week when we were talking about him, he plays a strong man's game. Will McClay brought up DeMarcus Lawrence as kind of a comp, but this guy actually brings a little more athleticism to the field.
The DeMarcus Lawrence?
Yeah. In some ways.
I don't know about that. I really like Kneeland's tape.
I'm not calling DeMarcus Lawrence a stiff. I'm just saying maybe
he's
done different things.
It's just always interesting when you watch college tape and you see a guy that does have versatility, because you don't see that as often as you do in the NFL. But this guy is a powerful player. He was a great speed to power conversion rusher. They moved him around quite a bit. Particularly in long yardage situations, third down. He stood up, he moved around. I'll be very interested to see what Mike Zimmer does. He's been out of it for a few years. I can tell you for a fact, just because some other things I do, that when coaches are out of it, they study the game hard. I mean, this is what these guys live for. So, Zimmer could come back and we all think of him as, double A gap, double mug. He's sort of, I don't want to say created that because I'm sure he didn't, but he used it a lot when he was in Cincinnati. I believe he brought Paul Gunther with him back to Dallas, and Paul Gunther was really a maestro of that as well. So you'll see double mug, but I think he'll probably expand some of his concepts just from being out and studying the game and seeing what other coaches that he knows and respects do. But with Kneeland, and as you said with Micah Parsons, who's the ultimate joker, Kneeland can also fill that role. And the Cowboys have a lot of good players on their defensive front. It'll be really interesting to see how they deploy them.
Yeah, well, the play we're going to put up here is a pressure Kneeland had against Bowling Green, where he came through from off ball, destroyed the right guard, and forced a quick throw. He had a few plays as a spinner, and it really intrigued me. I just like that guy, that big, 6'3", 267, I think.
That's what he was, yeah.
Reminded me of Zadarius Smith. I can't remember who your comp was, but just a really – he's a fascinating guy, and as is the case with you, I can't wait to see what he does in Mike Zimmer's defense. A couple more we got here. Bill's secondary with Cole Bishop. The play we're going to put up here is against USC, where he came down from deep and just upended Brendan Rice, son of Jerry, on a short crosser. Can also play deep third. We've talked about Bishop a lot, so if you can just – and by the way, Brandon Bean, the GM, didn't think he would be able to get Bishop where he got him. He was calling frantically to move up in the second round. Like, I'll give you a fourth, I'll give you a fifth. I don't care. We need this guy.
Yeah, I really liked Cole Bishop's tape, and I think the whole point of this was scheme fits.
Yep.
One of the things that we've seen from Sean McDermott in that defense over the years, when they've had Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, was the fact that those guys were interchangeable depending on the fronts and the defensive play call. Yep. So both could play in the box, both could play on the back end, both could play split safety, both could play post safety, both could play overhang. They could basically play anywhere you wanted them to play. Cole Bishop is that kind of player. He almost
he had 400 snaps in the box, over 400 in the box, in the slot, and at free safety over 3 collegiate seasons. So he's coming in like, I've already done it all. I've done it in an NFL conversant defense, because that Utah defense is something else. So Plug me in.
Yeah, and I think that was a critical piece here. And plus, he's played a lot of snaps in college. He decided to come back for this last year. So you'd have to assume that he's NFL ready and that he will get every opportunity to be a starting safety in their defense. And he's played all these positions. So he has a sense of what he's looking at. A lot of people don't think about that. You're looking at things totally differently. If you're a box safety, you're seeing things totally differently than if you're playing on the back end. And you have to learn all that. It's always easy to say, well, he can do that. Well, physically, a lot of guys can do a lot of things. But if they've never done them, they see the game totally differently. He's done all that. But just talking about the player, I really liked Cole Bishop. I mean, I thought that his tape, and I watched him for 2 years, so I really thought his tape was really good. I think he's a really good player. I think he's more athletic, which he showed with his athletic testing, than a lot of people might have thought he was.
Oh, very athletic. If
Yeah,
anything, his athleticism gets in his own way a little bit. Like maybe he overruns it, but no, very athletic.
yeah. So to me, that was a great draft choice because I think he fits exactly how Sean McDermott sees the safety position.
Yeah, Brandon Beam was like desperate to get this guy. Like he was throwing around fourth and fifth round picks, and it wasn't happening. And he was just like, I don't know if we're going to get him, and they got him. And he was very pleased about that. Speaking of safeties, Greg, the Green Bay Packers. Oh my gosh, what a makeover! They signed Xavier McKinney. Sneaky great signing. I love Xavier, former Giants safety and kind of do it all guy. Then in the draft, they get Javon Bullard and Katan Oladapo from Georgia and Oregon State, respectively. So 3 new safeties, a new defensive coordinator in Jeff Hafley, who has already said we're going to have our corners play more aggressively. Well, now they have 3 guys who can do a lot of stuff. Let's start with Bullard, who we've talked about before. And what I really loved about Bullard when I went back and researched his 22 season and then 23, Kirby Smart, because of some guys had left for the NFL, Kirby Smart said, okay, in 22, you were a box slot guy. We're going to play you 85% free. And like the Steelers did that with Minka Fitzpatrick when they got him from the Dolphins. But it's really unusual for a guy to switch his responsibilities so drastically from one season to another and just nail it down like Bullard did, because he did everything well.
Yeah, I think Bullard to me is kind of a lowercase Brian Branch. I don't think he's as good, but I think he's sort of that kind of player. He played the slot in 2022. He was a safety this year. I think he's a savvy player. You wouldn't call him a special athlete. He's not an explosive, sudden mover, but he sees things really, really well. He's a good tackler, as Branch was coming out. And, he's a versatile player that has done a lot of things in one of the more detailed defenses in college football.
Yeah.
So he has that in his background. Obviously you're always going to be taught new things in the NFL, but he's essentially been in an NFL style defense. So he's going to know a lot of the terminology and a lot of the methodology and what he's asked to do. I really like Bullard's tape a lot. You know more about the Oregon State safety than I do. Just in full disclosure, I did not get a chance to see him.
Yeah, he didn't. His responsibilities didn't change much over his last three seasons there when he was really a starter. He was about equally in the box, a slot in the deep third. He gave up 21 completions on 36 targets last year for 212 yards, 58 yards after the catch, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, 7 pass breakups, opponent passer rating of 61.3. The play we're going to put up, this is a pass breakup against Oregon for him. He moved from the slot to outside corner on a shift and then kept tight end Terrence Ferguson from scoring a touchdown. I like his movement skills. I think he's a guy who can play the deep third. With Bullard, we're going to put up the deflection against Ole Miss, which you probably saw. We started with a deep drop at the seam in cover 2 and then got to the boundary for the interception. You mentioned how well he sees things. I swear he saw that boundary throw before it even happened, and he was able to get there in time to kill it.
Yeah, no, Bullard's one of those guys. He just has a feel. He sees it. Sometimes you can't teach that. Guys just see it or they don't.
Yeah. But Oladapo, I think, so they have 3 safeties who really can play just about everywhere. And that, Jeff Hafley must feel like he just hit the buffet plate in Vegas. Like, I can do whatever I want. And that's so different from what Joe Barry had. So this is one of the more I kind of looked into this and that they got 3 new safeties and they can all do all these things. That's going to be a very modern, very interesting defense, I think, for sure. One more team we have is one of our favorite guys, 49ers secondary with cornerback Renardo Green from Florida State and safety Malik Mustapha from Wake Forest. You and I have given Renardo Green some serious love. So let's just review the play we're going to put up here. I've done it over and over. The end zone fade pass breakup from against LSU to Malik Neighbors, where he just, and he had an interception against Jaden Daniels in that same game. With Mustapha, he had 6 tackles for loss, and I know you know where I'm going with this. He had 6 tackles for loss. He had a tackle for loss against Florida State where he screamed down from the third.
Oh yeah, everybody saw. Yeah.
Second and 1 with Rodney Hill as a running back. I mean, yes, he's good in coverage. Now let's talk about Green first. Just what you liked about Green. When he got on the phone with John Lynch, who was a bit of a dog himself as a safety, he said, "I'm a dog" about 15 times. Tape backs it up.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me is, um, I wonder if the Niners now are going to play a little more man coverage because Green at Florida State, and I saw his tape the last 2 years, Doug. They're a man heavy defense,
And
and
press
he played. What's that?
and press heavy.
And press heavy. I was just going to add that. Yes,
Yeah.
and press heavy. So he's played a ton of press. It's funny we mentioned earlier in a totally different context, L'Jarius Sneed.
Mhm.
Green kind of reminded me of Sneed, the way Sneed plays now,
Yeah.
now when he came out of college. Just in terms of the physicality, how
Mhm.
competitive he is.
Oh yeah.
He's nasty. I really like Green's tape a lot. I'm sure one reason he wasn't drafted earlier is the 40 time. There's always a concern with corners when the 40 time isn't what people would like it to be, that they'll struggle to run vertically, top end speed. That's the phrase you hear all the time. It wouldn't surprise me if that's the reason that he lasted until he did, because I thought he was a really good prospect based on his tape. So now they have Green, ideally starting at one corner with Ward at the opposite corner. Yeah, and they can keep Lenore in the slot, which is, I
Right.
think, where they'd ultimately like him to be.
That's where he's better. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And then with Mustapha, I think you go back to when week 11 of the 2023 season where they lost Hufanga, suffered a torn ACL, was left for the rest of the season. The team did its best to get past that with Jair Brown and Logan Ryan as replacements, but Hufanga's dynamic top-down style is tough to replace. And I think that's where Mustapha comes in, because I'd heard all this stuff about, oh, he's a box guy, and this is why you don't want to listen to people before you do your own work, because I'm like, he's not a box guy. I mean, he's not a his transitions are pretty clunky to be like a true deep third safety, like a post safety, but he played a lot in kind of that overhang thing you were talking about, and then you just come down and end the play. And I think maybe that's one thing defensive coordinators are doing now with their, I guess, physically limited, for lack of a better term, safeties, that, okay, we're not just going to have you in the box, or we're going to vertically expand the box to like deep safety level, and then we can bring you down to do stuff. I thought Mustapha was great at that. And when you watch this video and you see how fast he went through that gap to force that 4-yard loss, you'll know what I mean.
Yeah, I like Mustafa. I thought he was a little better as a back end player than, like you said, than people might have thought, who just assumed he was a box player. Again, like you said, it's not like we're talking about Earl Thomas here,
No.
but I thought that he could, if he had to, play on the back end. Now, like you said, you don't want a heavy diet of post safety, but
No.
I think if you're going to play quarters, he can do that.
Yeah, he's
Um,
not lost out there. It's not like
no,
DeJean.
no,
Yeah.
no. He was just a fun player to watch, and you know, keep in mind that, the Niners did play Hufang at post safety quite a bit in their man coverage schemes, because it was Gibson, the other safety, who was 99% of the time the tight end matchup.
Yep.
So when they played cover one, Hufanga, who most people would have said coming out of USC was not a post safety at all, Hufanga was the post safety when they played cover one.
Right. Well, now ideally you have Hufanga and Mustapha on the field at the same time in certain packages. That's and then we talk about the scheme fit here.
Yeah, they won't. I mean, Mustapha, he'll be a package player because they got Jair Brown, who's going to be a really good player.
Yeah. Well, here's the question. Let's see. Nick Sorensen is a new defensive coordinator. Brandon Staley's the assistant head coach. So let's assume, because we don't know, that Staley is calling a lot of the shots as far as coverage and roles. I thought Mustapha was a good overhang player. And that Staley, from Jalen Ramsey, he's always loved his overhang guys with Derwin James. Maybe they look at him as, okay, he can also do some overhang hybrid stuff.
I'm sure. I mean, they didn't draft him. They drafted him because they obviously saw a place for him within the context of what they want to do. But I don't think he'll be a starting safety. He's not going to play 65 snaps a game.
Yeah. I want to get my reps. I had some numbers for. Oh yeah, and Renardo Green played a lot more press than a lot of college DBs. I went through and charted the plays. Last year in press, Green allowed 8 catches on 23 targets, 3.5 yards per catch. This is a lockdown guy. I would expect them to press more. I think if Steve Wilkes was the DC and they got these guys, they would press more. And this was another, again, press, again, attitude. I think if there's one common theme through this particular show, this is what these guys want in cornerbacks. The, sit back and wait and do that sort of thing. What Ran Carthon talked about, what you and I have talked about over and over on this podcast and video. If you can't press aggressively And it's almost, I'm like, it's the 1960s AFL Willie Brown stuff all over again. Like in 1970 when zone defense came in, everyone went, what's that? But that, it's so much more, it's not just press, but how you press and how that particular type of coverage works into the defense from cover zero, where you think, okay, that's the crazy Brian Flores blitz and, play tight, to quarters, to, what used to be off three, and now it's press three, because that's what we always do.
You got to be able to press somewhere in this league. You got to be able to press. You got to be able to play man, and you got to be able to press. And I think, that's just where the league's going now. And it's always cyclical. I'm sure we'll see reactions to it, on the offensive side. But right now, the way offense is built, you have to be able to press, and your corners need to be able to do that, or it's going to be difficult.
Final question. This is kind of nebulous, but what are your best press beaters if you're an offensive? If you're facing press all the time, let's say it's your two outside corners, your slot is not pressing, your safeties are back.
Well, then you start getting into formations and motion, Doug. That's the, because you start doing stacks, bunches, motions, things that prevent press from really being a big factor. It's not just beating, obviously you want receivers at times, you are going to line up static and you want your receivers to be able to win off the line of scrimmage, but you also want to do it with tactics. I mean, when you line up in tight bunch, it's tough to press that.
Yeah. Well, Greg, you're always our best scheme fit. Once again, we appreciate the insight and the knowledge from your home at NFL Films in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. And next week, we're going to get into the most improved position groups in the NFL post-draft. So that will be interesting. Greg, as always, thanks, man, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Doug.